Robert Stubblefield and Dr. Ray Shelton, two of which are our speakers are tardy today. And I'm Steve Richins, and we're going to continue the adventures in the Anteroom. And so I'm going to turn it over to Lee, but you'll see that Ray will come in a few minutes, and hopefully Bob. So let's get rolling. Over to Lee.
All right, Steve, thank you. Uh, I'm trying to figure out here exactly where we stopped last
Stop
time, but
last
I
time.
think there may be a little bit of reiteration of a few points here and there. I don't think that's a bad thing in this connection, but in fact, I think I know where we stopped. I want to go back a little back from that point. This is in the book Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand, and I'm talking about page 41.
Chapter 2,
Yeah,
page
um,
41.
chapter 2, page 41. And here we begin a discussion of what is referred to as form of perception. And I think I've already made the point that I believe the better term for this phenomenon, there is no doubt that there's a phenomenon, but the better term for the phenomenon is form of sensation. Because form, now, by the way, form does not have a lot of discussion. Well, in the objectivist literature, there is not a lot of discussion of it. And in particular, Ayn Rand does not write about form of perception um, much, if at all. I believe the earliest source for the term is in the original lectures back in the Nathaniel Branden Institute back in prehistoric times, but those were Branden, not Ayn Rand. Now, presumably, she has vetted all that stuff, but nevertheless, we have very little from her, and even the concept is not explicitly defined here that I can see. Dr. Peikoff does say we perceive objects in the form of sensations of color, sound, smell, and so forth. A being with radically different senses would presumably perceive reality in correspondingly different forms. So again, we have this moving between the terms perceiving and sensing, or sensation and perception. We perceive objects in the form of sensations. So anyway, I think that's the right way to describe it, actually, just the way it is here. It's form of sensations of things like color, sound, smell, and so forth. So examples would be if you look at a ball, you have a certain sensory qualities are experienced that are different if you feel the ball. In both cases, you perceive a round object. Your perception is of the same thing, but the sensory qualities that accompany it, I use that because that's the Gibson term. It's not that I think they're the basis, but the sensations do accompany. So our experiences of the world are typically of a mixed form. We experience the object and we experience our sensory qualities that accompany the perception of the object, and they're kind of mixed together and can be confused. And I think that's a major source of the errors that people make that are attributed to perception. In many cases, at least, those errors are because people confuse the sensory qualities with the perception. So if, for example, you look down the railroad tracks and when you look down from a certain perspective, or I shouldn't put it that way, taking a certain attitude towards it, it looks as if the railroad tracks meet. I'm sure everybody's had that experience. But on the other hand, perceptually, particularly if you move, because perception is based a lot on our the information we get by moving around rather than from a stationary standpoint. The sensation we get, the sensory qualities, are from a particular perspective, as if it were a snapshot. So if you had a snapshot of railroad tracks, they look like they meet. But if you move around, you see that in fact they're parallel. Or if you look at a coin on its edge, the sensory quality, the form that you experience, I'm going to call them form of sensation from now on. The form of sensation you might experience from a particular perspective is of an oval shape. But actually, if you move around, your perceptual system will be sensitive to the information that specifies that is actually round. You get that information, it deforms in a certain way that is characteristic as you walk around it. It changes its form in a certain way. Actually, more importantly, it changes the light that comes to your eye in such a way that it's the way that a round coin, the light off the round coin would. Boy, I'm having a hard time saying this. It's difficult to say this without diagrams. Um, there is a pattern of stimulation that comes off the coin as you walk around it that is specific to it being round, and your perceptual systems can detect that. You perceive the coin as round. You may have an impression of it being oval, but you perceive it as round. And you don't do that by having a sensation of ovalness and then somehow fix that up, add something to that. Hi, Ray. You
Well,
know,
good
that's not how
morning.
you. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you. I do apologize. My internet was down for a few moments.
Life in America. What can I say? Anyway, I was talking about this topic, sensation versus perception, and the idea that sensations are sensory form. What's called form of perception is better described as form of sensation, and that's exactly the way Dr. Peikoff describes it on page 41. He refers to in the form of sensations. That's the right way to talk about it. It's not what we refer to as form are properties of sensations, not property of the perception. When you perceive a coin, you perceive it as round. When you perceive the railroad tracks, you perceive them as parallel. When you perceive humans, you perceive them as human size, not as little tiny creatures as they might appear in your sensory qualities. So those are two different things, and J.J. Gibson refers to them as the senses considered as perceptual systems. That's our awareness of the world, versus the senses considered as channels of sensation, which is the passive uh, impressions we get from a particular perspective in a kind of a snapshot manner. We get these sensory qualities. We get these experiences of oval coins, or in Alan Godhelf's example, the envelope at an angle. If you look at it from a certain point of view, the sensory point of view, it looks like a trapezoid. But of course, it's an envelope, and if you walk around it or move it a little bit, you will perceive it as what it is, which is a rectangle. We basically we perceive things as what they are. The idea of seeing things as things in themselves is not actually. I don't think that's wrong. It's just the Kantian way is you might say it's not wrong exactly. It's redundant. We see things when we see things as they are in themselves. That's the way we see them. That's the way we perceive them. I'm sorry, we perceive them. But there is this other experience that goes along with perception, which are the awareness of the sensory qualities. And philosophers get confused, and so can humans get confused. So a lot of the things that we call errors in perception are actually errors of confusing sensory qualities with actual perceptual awareness. When people, if somebody, if a young child thinks that when they see a person far down the street that it's a tiny person, which supposedly Hermann von Helmholtz. Anyway, he says that when he was a child, that's what he imagined or considered people far away to be little people. Who knows if that's true? But anyway, that would be an example of confusing sensory qualities with perception, and that's a source of error for philosophers and regular people, normal regular people. Okay.
And so the
Yes.
solution in objectivism has been somewhat the inerrancy kind of tact, and you spoke to that last time.
We talked
It's,
about that a little bit.
you know,
That's actually, I mean, it's not that term doesn't show up here. That's
no,
a later term. Dr. Peikoff, in my view, correctly says perception is valid. That is, it gives you genuine information, genuine knowledge, genuine cognition, genuine awareness of reality, of the way things are, of entities and their attributes. It doesn't give you some kind of, well, let's go on. Let's go on from there and talk some more about form. And I think we already talked about what got us to a certain point here, but let's go on this on still on page working still on page 41, I believe. Page 41. And it's the bottom of page 41.
Lee, may I ask you a question here?
Absolutely.
It strikes me as at least a good many of the examples you mentioned and other confusions that people have regarding perception is in regard to quote unquote perceptual errors or confusions. That what's really going on is that we normally perceive things in our normal environment, the normal environment we inhabit every day. Inhabit every day. And a lot of these confusions seem to just come from the fact that we occasionally find ourselves in unusual circumstances. That is, we normally aren't looking off in the distance looking at things. We're looking at things nearby, or we're looking at an envelope, right? We're going to mail it and so forth and so on. We're not normally looking at things upside down or at a twisted angle and so forth. And so a lot of these confusions come from the fact that we're just temporarily outside of our normal framework for perceiving these things. And so they strike us initially as confusing or an error, when in fact it just takes a few moments to realize, oh, we're in a different perceptual framework. No, that's not the right word. We're in a different framework in terms of perceiving things, in terms of angle or level of illumination, where a color doesn't look the same under one form of illumination versus another form of illumination. I'm not too sure if what I'm talking about covers exactly everything you're talking about at this point.
I don't think it covers. I think that happens, but it certainly doesn't cover. A lot of things happen all the time and continuously, and even with experience. Okay, the bent stick, the old philosophers stand by. The bent stick looks bent no matter how many times you've looked at it in your life. You look at it a million times, and you still look at it and it looks bent. Again, I would say from a particular standpoint, from a particular perspective, as a snapshot, it's a bent stick. Now, if you twirl, we talked about this last time. If you twirl it, it doesn't look like when you twirl. It doesn't look like what a bent stick would look like when it's twirled. Right. So that gives you information. That's Gibson referred to that. If you pull it out, obviously, if you pull it out of the water, you'll see. Even if you just walk around it, it looks different from what an actually bent stick would look. So there's a lot of things you can do perceptually to overcome the obtrusive nature of that sensory experience. Again, I wouldn't call. I'm tempted to call actually, I'll go further. It's not a perception when you see the bent stick. So the question is, what is it? I mean, there is definitely experience that you have to account for. The stick looks bent. That's a matter of optics, really. I'm saying that actual perception, generally speaking, involves walking around things. The sensory qualia that you get, qualities, which accompany perception, are more instantaneous, quick things from a particular perspective. And so I think that's at work there, and that's at work in many of the cases. Yes, there are some things like you say that the perceptual systems evolved for a particular purpose. And if you kind of go outside that purpose, I mean, for example, you can't expect to see how far away the moon is,
Right. What I was thinking,
or something, but yeah.
what I was thinking about is that normally in our everyday experience, we do not experience things as through two mediums, the medium of air and the medium of water. That's generally not our experience. And just as an aside, you probably know this already, but otters have a lens on their outer eye for when they're above water, and they have another lens for when they go underneath water, because obviously light travels at a slower speed underwater, and when they're hunting, if they had the lens that was covering their eye while they were above water, it would make hunting more difficult. And as soon as they go into the water, the lens, they have an inner lens under their eyelid, comes over their eye. I thought you might find that interesting if you didn't know.
Yeah, I've heard that. I doubt that has anything to do with the speed of light, which is so fast in either case. I don't think it matters. Well, the speed of light does matter. It does matter in refraction, of course.
There we go. That
refraction
is the point I was trying to
if and it is true that animals have adaptations for that reflect that fact. There's the archer fish. There's a fish that can shoot down flying insects, I guess, and shoots them down by squirting water, and it has to somehow account for the bending. But again, you see, if you move around, there's information in the light that specifies the way things really are, and that's generally true. Especially when you move, there's information in the light as a general rule that specifies the way things really are, as opposed to these sensory forms. So if you move around, you will see the coin as round. You will see the person as a human-sized person. There's information in the light that specifies that. Now, I haven't really talked about what that information is. That's a little outside of the scope of this discussion, and we have discussed that before on Cutting Edge. But I probably should say, I probably should give some idea about what that information might be. So let me try to give something, but that's another subject. But this is a simple example. If you have a surface that you're standing on,
I don't want to slow you down. It's just something
that has a texture that is at least, as one professor of mine put it, stochastically regular. Some kind of texture that has at least a certain amount of regularity to it. Maybe the elements are like cobblestones on a cobblestone road. There are elements like that, but they could be rocks or patches of green or something else. So if you have a surface of that sort that's more or less regular, and you have an object on that surface, no matter how far away that object is, whether it's right up close to you on the surface or far away, it covers the same number of texture elements. So that number of texture elements covered is information for the size of the object. There's also another invariant for objects that stick above the horizon, and that's one of my favorites, but I can't really illustrate that one right now without using a diagram that I'm not going to draw here. So anyway, that just gives you just a sense, something of what it means to have an invariant that underlies perception, as opposed to the sensation. The sensation that you would get if you have an object on this surface would vary. The visual angle you get varies depending on if it's up close, there's a big visual angle, and if it's far away, there's a small visual angle, and you'd have to deal with that. And there is a whole theory of perception, going back to Hermann von Helmholtz, that tries to deal with those sensations and convert them by what he called unconscious inference, by intellectual processes that use the geometry of the situation, to try to infer what all what the objects really are from these ever-changing sensations. I can say that I don't think Helmholtz, in my own reading of Helmholtz, I don't think he quite succeeded in making that whole process work. And in any event, there's this other way of looking at things from J.J. Gibson. And by the way, the whole notion of unconscious inference in perception which is a famous statement from a famous phrase from Helmholtz. He doesn't use it a lot, though, but anyway, that's in the discussions of perception. He is associated strongly with unconscious inference. That's a hierarchy violation. You can't have inference before perception. You have perception. Inference is based on perception. It doesn't work to create perception. So that's just already a philosophical error. And it's the same thing in Immanuel Kant, where the idea is that you have to take the sensations and supplement them with innate categories of the mind to create perception. Now, again, as I said last week, I'm not a Kantian scholar, but that much I know about, I guess. And that's, of course, also wrong. J.J. Gibson has a different approach, and it's based on the fact that the information, the light that your eye samples, particularly when you move, there are invariants in the structure that if your system can pick up those invariants, you perceive the world as it is, not the world in some form or the world as it's not, but it needs to be corrected, but you perceive the world as it is. That's J.J. Gibson. Okay, so having said that, let's go ahead. I think I discussed up to the end of that page 41 pretty much. At the bottom there, again, Dr. Peikoff says, as long as one grasps the requisite relationship in some form, the rest is the work of the mind, not of the senses. Now, I'm not sure what that rest is, but I'm trying to say that there's a lot more that perception does that doesn't require the intellect, the mind, to operate on it, that we get actual cognition from perception that is not based on intellectual processes. That's what I'm trying to say here. Okay, moving on. Dr. Peikoff says, this is page 42, species with different sense organs gain from perception different kinds and or amounts of evidence. But assuming that a species has organs capable of the requisite range of discrimination and the mind to interpret what it perceives, such differences in sensory evidence are merely different starting points leading to the same conclusion. I think that's right, but the way he words it there, I'm a little. To me, I need some clarification about when he talks about the mind to interpret what it perceives, and such differences in sensory evidence. The way it's phrased suggests to me that we perceive sensory evidence, and that would be representationalism. What we perceive are things in the world, objects, entities, and their attributes and their actions, and we perceive those things and have knowledge of those things that comes from perception. That's where I'm saying. Oh, by the way, you don't have to go to well, he says other species, right? That's good. For example, insects have a totally different kind of eye. Have a compound eye, and if they were conscious, which I am doubtful of myself, but they would have a totally different sensory qualities, very different. But they'd still be picking up the same information. The perceptual system would pick up the same information. So the differences in sensory qualities, it's true, do not matter, but they don't matter because they're not the basis of perception. That's what I'm saying here. Okay, he then talks about atomic perception. I think I will move on from that and just go on to page 44, where yes,
that's
Steve.
That's part of the big error in that this atomic view of sensation, this Newtonian kind of.
No, that's not what I was talking about there.
Oh, okay.
I think he was talking about a creature that could perceive atoms. We don't perceive atoms unless you get a really good microscope that you can actually perceive. But without, with our unaided eye, we do not perceive atoms. But there could be some tiny creature that perceives atoms. Anyway, I wanted to just go by that. I don't have anything to say about that today. But that's a different issue from the idea of perception built up from little atoms that are constructed into a percept. And we'll come back to that because the definition of perception is coming up fairly soon, I think. So let me go ahead. Now here's an
Lee,
interesting. Yes.
Lee, when you refer to the book, could you please give the paragraph? That would be helpful.
Well, this is page, page 44.
It would help me keep
Yeah.
pace.
Okay, page 44. Okay, and that would no doubt be the case for other people who maybe have the book with them, which would be good if you have the book with you now. Not absolutely necessary because I'm going to be reading parts, but it would be helpful. Anyway, there's a section called Sensory Qualities as Real. And I'm looking at the second paragraph below that title, Sensory Qualities as Real, on page 44. He says, since the objects we perceive have a nature independent of us, absolutely, key point. That is a key point. That's the primacy of existence. And that is one of the key premises of those of us who are direct realists. There's a real world out there, independent of us, and we perceive that world, not some other world and not some distorted world. Okay, since the objects we perceive have a nature independent of us, it must be possible to distinguish between form and object. Okay, except I would agree with that, except I don't think in the first place that there's a form of perception. It's a form of sensation accompanies perception, but as a different channel, a different system entirely. And their actual perceptions are based on structure in the stimulation, in the light, in the case of vision, structure in the stimulation that comes to that is sampled by the eye. That's where our perceptions come from, not from taking sensations and performing some intellectual operations on them or any other kinds of operations on them. Okay, must be possible to distinguish between form and object, between the aspects of the perceived world now here I stopped for a moment because I'm thinking to myself, I'm wondering what he actually means here by the perceived world. I hope he means, I'm just not sure. It might be perfectly fine. I hope he means the part of the world that we acquire perceptual awareness about, because we don't perceive everything. There's all kinds of stuff going on in the world that I don't perceive, or you don't perceive, or anybody perceives. But another meaning of it could mean the world as it is experienced in through form, like the railroad tracks meeting. Is railroad tracks meeting part of the perceived world? I would say absolutely not. But I know some objectivists that have said that, yeah, that's the perceived world. Dr. Peikoff I haven't heard that from him, so I'm not sure. But I'll just bring that up as a question. All right, but some aspects of the perceived world that derive, well, you see, here's a problem. Some aspects of the perceived world that derive from our form of perception, such as colors, sounds, and smells, I don't think those things are perceived. Those are sensory experiences. And the aspects that belong to metaphysical reality itself, apart from us, well, that's the part that I think those things are what are actually perceived. Things like the shape of an object, the solidity of an object, the flatness of some surface that you can then put something on or stand on. Those are the kinds of things I'm talking about.
Sometimes shape, though, not the case, because if it's moving, then it's a variable. It's not. It's invariant.
No, I don't think so. Why? If you have a ball and you throw a ball, okay,
well,
it's round.
Yeah, morphographically, if you see a change quick enough, morphographically, as something Gibson wouldn't say, but
all right, go ahead. I'm curious now what you're going to do with this.
It's just that the shape of, say, you squeeze a tomato, or shape is not always an invariant. Sometimes it's in the sensory.
Like many attributes, entities have both potentialities and actualities.
Right. Okay. That's
okay. So all right. Yes, that's true. An acorn can turn into an oak, as the old Aristotelian example would have it, and that's true. But at a given time, an acorn has a particular shape, and that's part of its identity. And that is not, by the way, that part of its identity is not given to it by consciousness. It's just its identity. I'm going to bring up that point again because there's going to be some issues about
Okay, a
that.
snowball down the mountain is
Well,
a
again,
better example.
a
Is this the
snowball.
snowball in hell, Steve? Is this the snowball in hell?
Yeah, things can change, and some things change faster than others. But that's the issue of change, and that is an issue. It goes back to Greek philosophy, but again, Aristotle's answer is pretty good, isn't it? That things have
Yeah.
actuality and they have potentiality, and sometimes those potentials are actualized and things will change, but they can only change within what they have,
Specified
as part of their
nature.
identity, as consistent with their identity. So I don't think that's a problem. And when you throw a ball, it's moving, but the ball has that round shape, and even though the angle subtended to, if you throw a ball, to somebody else on a ball field, as it goes away, the angle subtended to your eye will decrease. Your sensory experience, your sensory quality, the form that you experience will be a decreasing angle. But that doesn't mean the ball's shrinking. The ball still covers the same number of texture elements if it happens to be over a texture, and there are other invariants to pick that out. It has the same size, and we can perceive it as being a constant size unless it changes. I guess that's my point here. And those things are, to use Dr. Peikoff's phrase, they belong to metaphysical reality itself, apart from us. The roundness of a ball is a feature of metaphysical reality. Consciousness does not contribute to that roundness. Okay. Then he says, what then is a status formal aspect? So they're not in the object, as it fall there in the mind. And I'm going to go on from there. I think I will let that lie for the moment. I'm going to go on to the next paragraph. It starts with Ayn Rand's answer. This is I guess it's paragraph 3 of the sensory qualities is real section, where he says Ayn Rand's answer about distinguishing form from object. We can distinguish form from object, but this does not imply the subjectivity of form or the invalidity of the senses. Okay, I certainly would agree with that. But again, what I'm saying here is that you distinguish form from object because form is form of sensation, and that's got nothing to do with the perceptual process. It's just something that accompanies it. So what you're sorting out are your perceptions from your sensations. You're sorting those things out, basically. Okay, then the next paragraph is interesting. Certainly want to raise a question about that. The task of identifying the nature of physical objects as they are apart from man's form of perception does not belong to philosophy, but to physics. We have to go to physics, he's saying, in order to discover things like shape. We could not identify the nature of physical objects. Well, of course, I use the term physical, of entities, the nature of entities, before the science of physics does it. Is that the issue? I don't think that's right. I don't think so. I think I can tell by perception that if you have a rectangular box, you can perceive that shape as rectangular. You can perceive what that shape is, and you can perceive it, and that shape is what it is, completely independent of consciousness. It doesn't come from man's form of perception, that shape, or its weight. Color is a different matter. Color is a complicated subject in perception, but in the objectivist discussions, color is generally attributed to form. We perceive things in the form of color. That I've seen several times in various places. I think even here, earlier in this chapter. So let's not go to color, but things like height or length, and the shape and the weight and the solidity and the flatness and those things are characteristics that objects have, entities have, that are not in any way a function of consciousness. Consciousness does not give us the flatness of an object. It's there. It's objectively, well, I'm tempted to say intrinsically, because objectively is the wrong term. Objective is the wrong term. I'm tempted to say it's intrinsically, because I don't have a better word, part of the nature of the things perceived. They don't come to us from consciousness, or how our consciousness works. Now, we may or may not be sensitive to things like flatness of an object, flatness of a table, let's say. Maybe a fruit fly can't see that. Okay, but it's there, and a table will hold. You can put an object of a table on a table, regardless of whether you perceive it as such. It has that ability to that part of its nature makes it possible to put something on it that won't just immediately fall off because it's flat and it's solid. Those are characteristics of objects. Now, then Dr. Peikoff says there is no philosophic method of discovering the fundamental attributes of matter. Certainly that's true. That is what science is about, or particularly physics. But I think it's not everything that exists intrinsically in itself. I'm searching for the right term here, because objective is not the right term. Some things that exist in themselves, there are properties that are not the fundamental attributes of matter. We don't have to go down to that level. I'm saying that shape exists in an object. Maybe a ball is a good object to focus on. A ball has the shape it has, regardless of what perceptual qualia, sensory qualities you experience. It has that shape, and that shape is not a fundamental attribute of matter. It is a causal consequence of the fundamental attributes of matter, whatever they may be, however far you have to go down. But if you go down to atoms and molecules, they're arranged in a certain way that makes the ball shape. They have to be, the molecules of that ball have to be arranged in a certain way. So, of course, molecules are not the fundamental attributes of matter either. We don't know for sure, which is why Dr. Peikoff talks about the little puffs, but whatever they are, I'm saying there is a reality to things that are not the fundamental attributes of matter, whatever they happen to be, are not the only things that exist. They may be the building blocks of things that exist, but they are not the things that everything that exists. So Dr. Peikoff refers to the irreducible building blocks that combine to make up physical objects, apart from any relationship to man's form of awareness. Okay, there are such things. We don't know necessarily what they are. We know there is particle physics, and that's still working. But I'm saying that the physical objects at their own level, at what Gibson called the ecological level, that was his term. That's not to do with, by the way, that term is not the same as ecology in the common sense these days. But anyway, what Gibson called the ecological level is the level at which we have awareness of things like something can be a surface of support, or you can look out of a doorway and see that you can walk through it. That property of being able to walk through it is not dependent on consciousness. It doesn't matter whether you're conscious of it or a fruit fly is conscious of it. That door has the size, that the opening has the size that it has, and that it allows you to pass through it. It also allows the fruit fly to pass through it. Those things have nothing to do with sensory qualities, have no relation to them whatsoever.
Lee, may I interject here?
Yeah.
One of the things I'm trying to do is get as clear an understanding of your position as I can at this moment. I've read some Gibson, but not much, and I've certainly read a lot of objectivism and a lot of psychology, but the way I've held it in my mind and the way I've understood it is that there's one distinction that Dr. Binswanger has talked about and others have talked about, and that is simply distinguishing between, well, let me back up for a second. The point that they make and others make is that what we perceive is reality, which is what we perceive as the world. And what we don't perceive is the means by which we perceive the world. We're not perceiving the means, we're perceiving the world. And
can I stop you right there for a second?
Yes,
Because I think I can cut through this right away. My whole point here is cut right through this. My whole point is the sensory qualia, the form of sensation, are not the means of perception. They have nothing to do with the means of perception. They are the means of sensation, which is a wholly different, according to Gibson, it's a wholly different system. The senses considered perceptual systems is a system in the perceiving organism that is that works, that operates to pick up information in the structure of the stimulation, particularly of light, and the perceptions derive from that. And the sensory quality experiences are not part of that process. So I just reject that means thing entirely. This is often expressed as the what of perception versus the how. And I'm saying the how is not by anything, the sensory quality have nothing to do with the how of perception at all. By the way, the word, well, let me stop there with that because that's maybe good enough. And did you want to go on from there, Ray, or have I cut you off at the knees, I hope?
Unfortunately, if I had legs, no, all I can say at this point is my question was, if you recognize a difference between a distinction between our means of awareness, right? We don't, versus this concept of a form. In other words, historically, the argument has been made is that we don't perceive the means, in other words, we don't perceive our nerves, we don't perceive the electrical impulses. That's not what we are aware. In other words, let me put it this way. We're not aware of our nerves traveling through our body, so forth and so on. What we are, okay. And my question was, and I think that's a true statement. We don't perceive our nervous system. I'm not going to use the word perceive. I don't like it in this context. It doesn't have any meaning to me right now. No matter how many definitions you've given, or Gibson has given, or Binswanger has given, it still doesn't make any sense to me. So I'm just going to say aware. That what we are aware of is the external world. Now, Dr. Binswanger and objectivists have come up with this word of form. And what I was trying to get at was, did you see a difference between the word form that they're using and the idea of, by means, I'm simply talking about our nervous system. That's all I'm talking about. I'm actually talking about the physical means of awareness. And when people have said the means of awareness, that's how I've always understood it, correctly or incorrectly. I've always understood when they say the means, I've always simply understood that as simply saying the nervous system.
Well, wait a minute. What we're getting away from form here.
Right, exactly. So if
our discussion is about form,
right, exactly.
I mean, you want to talk about the means, that's a scientific question. It's, by the way, it's not just the nervous system. That is only a part of the whole process, but that's a scientific question, and it's a different question. And form has nothing to do with that.
Okay.
It's irrelevant to that.
Okay.
So if you want, we can discuss that question probably another time. You know, how does the perceptual system work?
No,
Because yeah.
no, the point I'm trying to make is that for many people and many objectivists that I've talked to, form and the nervous system are synonyms.
Nonsense.
Okay. I'm just saying that that's the point.
I don't think.
So my question for you, and I think it would be helpful to listeners.
Where do you get this? You're talking about. I don't know. Let's see if I can. Again, I try to want to cut through this because I think it's just a confusion.
But what I'm saying is cutting through it is precisely sidestepping the confusion that people have. So the idea of what form is, what you're calling sensual qualia, it would be very helpful. Doesn't have to occur here, of course, to nail down exactly what those things mean, as opposed to Dr. Peikoff's comment and others. They're simply, well, we perceive things by their form. And it's like, okay, well, what does that mean? Right. So I'm just saying from your purposes.
Nobody said, I don't think anybody said we perceive things by their form. That would be a gross error. What they say is we perceive things in a form. That's what they say. And so they're not talking about the nervous system. They're talking about it as an aspect of conscious experience, not the nervous system. I don't think you're going to find.
I mean, that's a good distinction to drive a wedge through for.
Yeah, I don't think if you found this phrase somewhere, we perceive by a form, that would be a really bad error. And that would be interesting when you find that statement that way, let me know.
All right.
Because we should definitely look at that, because I will condemn that immediately if we could find it. But nobody does that as far as I know. They say we perceive it in a form. Yeah.
When you start talking condemning, you start sounding like the old objectivists rather than just.
No, I'm not condemning the people. I'm condemning the idea.
And
that idea would be
being wrong
would be worthy of serious criticism. Let us say.
Oh well, that's a whole other thing rather than condemning.
Okay. So anyway, I don't think
that's helpful. That's helpful.
Okay. All right. Well, let me go ahead a little further, but that is helpful to keep in mind that well, it's also true that again the whole notion of form is not in Ayn Rand's writings. I mean, she clearly talked about it to people like Dr. Peikoff, but it's not in the published material. I don't think. My research staff isn't here at the moment. But I think she'd back me up on that fact. It comes from other places, other sources, and it's not like they're really good definitions. Dr. Harry Binswanger, in How We Know, says we perceive in the form of sensory qualities. That's a quote.
Yes,
we perceive in the form of sensory qualities. And that's the closest that I can remember anywhere to a definition.
Well, the in or by to me at this point seem synonymous. But I'm just saying, I'm just telling you what I know. I'm not trying to argue with you.
Yeah.
But I can give you something from this, if you want to quote.
Oh yeah, okay.
For those, it's the transcript of the original lecture.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about.
Okay.
That's what I was referring to.
All right. So here's a quote from page 48.
Good.
On their chapter, What is Reason? It's the fourth paragraph. Quote, a very important epistemological error is the failure to differentiate between the perception of reality and the form in which reality is perceived.
Yeah. And I've agreed with that, except that I think that the last part is really the form in which reality is not perceived. It's not the form in which reality is perceived. It's confusing the perception of reality with the form of reality. It is not the way it's not perceived, the way it is experienced in sensation. That's the more accurate. That is the correct way, I would say, of putting that point.
Okay. And then on page 49, the last paragraph, I'm not going to read the whole example. I'm just catching the language. Now consider the case of the colorblind man. He perceives reality as correctly as we do, only there are differences in his form of what does he say? Form of perception. So I would think that the form-object distinction, whatever that means, actually is directly from Ayn in work that she would have approved of.
No, I already referred to that. I said that was in those lectures.
Okay.
But she didn't write those lectures. I'm just saying in her published work. That is not her published work.
Okay, that's not correct.
A transcript. That's a transcript from
Lee. That's not correct either. It's not correct. Ayn Rand wrote herself chapter 2, What is Reason, and she wrote herself chapter 12, I believe, on aesthetics. Okay.
Yeah, that is not published Ayn Rand work. That was lectures.
I understand.
I know what you're talking about. It's not published. It's not like Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. It's not a published work of Ayn Rand. I don't know what we're talking about here. It doesn't. I think it's probably it's probably authentic anyway. Despite,
but, there's some things that you have to clear up. You have to be clear on this sorts of things. If you're going to talk about the objectivist position, right? Obviously, well, I won't say obviously. I'll simply say this. She was at those lectures. She approved of what was said at those lectures. The original tapes and transcripts of those lectures are at the archives. And Brandon did not write those. And he never said he wrote them. He always said he prepared them. And the reason he said he prepared them is because they were not just written by him. They were largely written by Ayn herself, plus a few others. But that's a different issue. My point is the language of object in form does or does not come from Ayn. That is the question when you said it didn't come from her. But
no, I didn't say that. I did not say that. Well, I said what I said, which is true. It's not in the published works. That's what I said.
Yes, and neither
this is not a published work of Ayn. This thing that you have in your hand is a let's not talk about that thing. It's probably basically legitimate, but it's not published work of Ayn Rand.
I'll make one more point, and then we'll go on.
What are we talking about?
Okay, whether something is part of objectivism or not, but let me make my point, please.
Yeah.
Okay, it does not have to be published. She specifically said that lectures that she authorized were to be considered, so it doesn't have to be published. And second, the spiral theory of knowledge was never been published either, and yet that is part of her theory of knowledge. So there's the one issue of what to attribute to her, and then there's the issue of whether those ideas are true or not.
I wasn't focusing much on particularly on what comes from her. I said it came from her, by the way.
Okay.
That's not what I'm focused on. I'm just focused on the fact that it is not in the published literature, and it's kind of an unclear. Well, that's one of the reasons why it's a kind of unclear concept.
Yes.
Is that as there's a problem there, and that's part of the problem. I think had there been had she used it in a published one of her published forms where she really knocked it out carefully, we'd have a lot better notion than we have. And as it stands, the best notion I've read the thing in what you have there. The best description that I know of it comes from Harry's How We Know. It's the one that I just mentioned. That let me see if I can repeat it. I'm already forgetting. We perceive the world. Maybe this isn't exact. We perceive the world in the form of sensory qualities, and I think that's an accurate description of the phenomenon, that the sensory qualities. But what I'm denying over and over again today, and last time as well, is that the idea that we perceive in that form, we have sensations in that form. We experience sensations along with perception. They're mixed together usually. And it's important for our purposes to separate those things because the errors that people make that are attributed to perception, at least many of them, are actually errors of confusing the sensory form, which is not perception, with the perception. So if they confuse, if they say, as some I've heard people say, that we perceive railroad tracks as meeting, they are confusing the sensory experience of the meeting when you look at it from a particular perspective with the actual perception, which the perception is of railroad tracks being parallel. That's the perception. So that's I guess my point there. Again, I'm restating. You want to? It looks like you want to.
Well, I just don't see any difference at this point, and
Yeah.
that isn't due to your explanation, because you're going very quickly at a very high level, and that is, personally, at this point, I don't see any difference between what you're calling a sensory form versus a perceptual form. There's that word there, form, and for me, you're simply, why not just simply say, I'm not too sure what's gained by this additional language, just simply saying we're aware of the world. That's what we're aware of.
No, when you have an awareness, I don't know, I haven't gotten this across yet, I guess. When you have an awareness in your mind of the railroad tracks as meeting, that is not an awareness of the world. That is wrong. It is erroneous. The railroad tracks do not meet. I ask you to, if you want to, walk up those railroad tracks and you'll find out that no matter how far you go, they never meet.
Yeah.
And that the coin is not really elliptical, it's round.
Yeah, but I'm not aware of them
The
meeting.
stick is not bent, it's straight.
Yes, but
the envelope is not trapezoidal in shape, it is rectangular.
But I'm judging.
You never perceive, let me finish this. You never perceive, you don't perceive letters as rectangular. You don't perceive humans as tiny little creatures. You don't perceive railroad tracks as meeting.
Right.
You don't perceive coins as oval. Those are not phenomena of perception. They're not They're not what you perceive. You perceive the world veridically.
Yeah, I would wholly agree. I would wholly agree. But I would simply say,
Yep.
I'm not going to avoid that word perception again. When I'm not aware of the railroad tracks meeting, I simply see what I see, and I have to make a judgment, an additional judgment on top of that.
When people, it's not a judgment. It's not a judgment. It's a look. You don't have to judge to see them. It's simply the way they look. They look like they come together. That there's no judgment involved there. That's the way they look. That is the form.
They don't look that way to me. They just look like railroad tracks.
No, you are. I don't know.
But that's
you need to take a certain. You need to take a certain attitude towards it. But you mean you don't know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the experience of a coin as oval, of people as being looking tiny, of a rectangular object like an envelope looking trapezoidal from a certain perspective.
I know.
You don't.
I know.
Do you know what I'm talking about there?
I know about the experiments. I know about people.
No. Forget experiments. It's got nothing to. You don't need to bring in any experiments.
I know, but Lee.
Do you know from your personal experience what I'm talking about?
A coin that is turned on its side looks like a coin that's turned on its side. It does not look like an oval. I could trace an oval shape in space, but it doesn't look like an oval. It looks like a coin turned on its side. That's all I can say. That's all.
Well,
that's the only way
people do say.
I'm just giving you my.
People do
say my internal report.
The coins. So okay, let's go to the stick. I guess let's go to the stick. Does the stick look bent to you? In water.
Bent is not quite the right word, but I would say disjointed is what I would say.
Well, it's not disjointed. The fact is, that's my point. It is not disjointed. The experiences that are form, which you apparently don't have many of, the experiences of form are not perceptual experiences because they're not the way things are. They're the way things look, and the way things look are a function basically of the sensory qualities that you get in a kind of snapshot manner from a particular perspective. Perception is what you get over time, particularly by moving around, or moving things, or moving the things, or moving around the things, where you can generate the variation and stimulation from which invariance can be extracted. So that's the difference. Now, I don't know if you have the experience. I'm not sure you have the experiences that people are calling form. I don't know if you have those experiences.
Well, I don't really understand.
There'd be no issue if the idea was that you perceive the coin in a round form, That's kind of redundant. When you perceive the coin, you perceive that it's round. The issue comes up because some people perceive the coin in a form that is oval. That's where the issue comes up.
Well, they're making that claim.
And if you don't do that, if that never happens to you, which is interesting in itself.
Well, no.
There's no. Then the formal stuff is not an issue for you.
Part of that is entangling all of this language of, and I'm assuming that's what you're trying to do, to untangle all of this. But all I can say is march ahead, and
that's right. We can't go much further today.
I'll give you what I can.
It's interesting that you don't seem to have the experiences. That let me just go back to one of them again, because this is the one that Alan Godhelf brings up in on Ayn Rand. Is the letter that he says, the form in which you see it, if it's tilted, okay, the letter's tilted to your line of sight. He says the form is not rectangular. I think he used the term trapezoidal because that would be an accurate description of it. You perceive it in a form that's trapezoidal. Absolutely not. You absolutely don't perceive it in a form. You see it. It looks trapezoidal. Now that's his example. Again, I'm just curious. You've never had that experience?
Okay, let's see. This is what I would say. If I were to think of the envelope as occupying a flat space, I could trace the outside of it in the shape of a trapezoid.
But you don't experience it that way, ever. You don't look at something like that and the way it looks to you.
Well, I don't know the way.
I don't know what you mean by the way
something. I don't know what you mean by the way something looks. It just looks.
I agree. You don't.
When you say way, that word form comes back in, or the word means comes back in. What I'm looking at is an envelope that's twisted at an angle, and I know it's at an angle. So I know that if I were to,
I'm going to go one more here, because this is sort of interesting. And maybe you're a different species from human. You might come from another planet. But let me try one more thing here. Have you heard of the Ames room? You know
this is where you walk and it looks like people getting smaller.
Well, you know what you do is there's a room, and the room, by the way, is in the shape of a trapezoid. Speaking of trapezoids,
yeah.
But it's so shaped, and there's a little peephole,
right?
And you look through the peephole, and the guy at the back in the corner, the far corner, is a giant, and the guy close up is a midget. But when you look through the peephole and you can't move at all, they look okay, they look the same height. You got this idea of looking? That's the Ames room. They look the same height, although they're not. Now, as soon as you move, or like you walk around the Ames room and look in that is completely destroyed. And you will see them the way they are, which is a big tall guy and a little short guy, but they look equal when you look through the peephole of the Ames room because of the way the Ames room is constructed, so that they subtend the same angle to your eye, and you're taking this sensory snapshot. It's not really, I'm saying it's not really perception there. It's a sensory experience based on a kind of a snapshot from a particular, they're forced to take what amounts to a snapshot from a particular perspective by the way the Ames room is set up. So do you know what I mean when I say that they look equal in height? Does that mean anything to you, or is that outside of your experience?
No. My experience is that they occupy the same. If I were to place a grid over what I'm looking at, they would both occupy the same vertical distance to each other, but they do not look the same size. I'm fully aware.
Okay, all right. You come from Mars, clearly.
And thank you. And I know that this is a mechanism set up to create cognitive and perceptual distortion. So I know that they're not the same size. They don't look the same size.
You wouldn't have to know anything about it. You don't have to know anything whatsoever. There's this room, and you don't know anything about the room. The way they would have it at a museum is would be, you just have the hole to look through. You don't know what the room shape is from the outside, and you looking through this hole, and there are these two guys, and they look the same height. Are you saying they wouldn't look the same height to you? Not knowing anything about the shape of the room or anything else about other than you look through this hole, and there are these two guys, and indeed they would subtend the same angle to your eye, and as a snapshot, as a matter of sensory quality, they look the same. I'm understanding you to say that they wouldn't look the same to you, but I'm not sure if that's right.
Well, I mean, all I can say is I recognize that they occupy the same vertical space in my visual frame. That's all I can tell you. I can't tell you anything else. So
okay, all right. I think that's probably as far as we can go.
I know what human beings are. I know they're not the same height. So,
no, you don't know. That's what I'm trying to tell you is you would not know that. You wouldn't know that because you don't know the nature of the room. You walk up to this thing and there's this peephole, and you don't know what's behind the peephole.
World.
No, it's not the nature of the world we're talking about here. The room is constructed in a particular way to produce that momentary sensory impression. And I'm just trying to figure out whether you'd have that impression or not. And you're starting talking about, well, the world isn't that way. Well, you wouldn't know that. Yeah, you wouldn't know. You don't think so? Okay.
No, I would just say Gibson. This whole thing about, from what I know about Gibson and the environment, is that we don't come
All right.
to the world without a background environment, and that's his point, I think.
Let me try this.
Ahead. Wait a minute, Steve. I think we reach kind of the end of things. First of all, we should check now. Is there anything in the chat that we want to deal with? We better check that.
This
is just interesting, but it's not. It's getting a little bit.
Nothing that I can
alien,
out.
I guess. There's nothing. There's no questions. Fine. There are no questions there, no. Steve.
There's questions, but there's things that we've discussed, and they're hanging in the air because we're.
What do you got? I'm still curious.
Things about the stick, things about the transcript. It's offshoots of these things. Let me take a stab. Okay. So Gibson says when he starts,
the cutting edge, Steve.
when he starts, he's getting out of the laboratory. He's getting out of the peephole view of perception. Most people educate their attention to these illusions. And so the clouded conceptualizations stacked on more conceptualizations. And Gibson is simply saying the information is in the environment. And it took me reading The Senses Considered once, and then Lee said at Ocon, he said, I want to remind you something, or he brought up the point Gibson says about sensory qualia, or channels of sensation.
Sensory qualities is the term used by Gibson.
Yeah.
Qualities.
Those are irrelevant. They're irrelevant to perception. And I looked at him, I go, I read that, but it didn't sink. It still doesn't quite sink in because I have these ways of interpreting the illusions, and you seem to be falling back into those. You have to spread.
Are you talking to me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, all I would say is when you say sense, I don't know what you mean by sensory qualia. That just seems to me like form. So I have to, in other words, I don't have the background that you're carrying with you, and having that background of what these terms mean without real life examples just means that I need to do more reading in order to grasp what you're saying. Again, things like sensory qualia, whatever terms you're using, like the word form, these are all either in the objectivist world or outside of the objectivist world. are technical terms. And when we're part of the motivation for doing this, part of the motivation is to learn Dr. Pierson's perspective, just for my own interest in learning how that agrees or disagrees with objectivism. I myself am not wedded to objectivism. I'm wedded to the truth. So you don't have to worry about me being a defender, quote unquote, of objectivism. And these are difficult topics that, as you have said, require more background reading. So I don't want to come off as snarky. I'm actually reporting my own internal experience as I understand it. And I'm doing it not to challenge you, Lee. That's not why I'm doing that. I'm simply trying to get a grasp on what your position is.
Yeah, I understand that, but I think if you don't know what I'm talking about when I say the railroad tracks from a certain perspective or point, or taking a certain introspective point of view, it's really introspection is what it is. They look, if you don't know what it means to say that they look like they meet, then I can't go. You're as far as I'm concerned, you're a Martian.
Well,
I can't go anywhere because that's where you have to start somewhere, and that's kind of a basic experience. Okay. Anyway, we probably should move on to the Daniel has a Zoom room for us. Is that true, Daniel? Hello, Daniel.
Yes, but it's this one, so we just stay here.
Okay, it's just a Zoom room, so we stay. Anybody can now. We are now, and YouTube is going to stop momentarily, right, Daniel?
Yes, I'm posting the link in the chat, so people who want to come.
The link for the Zoom room is posted, and we can continue. I'm going to go get my samurai sword, my katana.
I was going to say, is this where it turns into a shooting gallery?
This is where it gets bloody, and no, nothing's going to happen to anybody. But this is where we can discuss this. We can go further on this. We haven't gotten very far. So part 3 is coming up next week. I hope to get a little further because I want to get my real favorite topic in the Anteroom is volition. That's my real favorite topic. And someday we'll get there. But this is but this stuff is hard. It's hard. This underlying material is difficult. And so it's not surprising that we're going slowly. Anyway, let's go. Yes.
I was going to say, clearing up as many confusions as I can, to me, is moving light years ahead. So I don't want you to feel that you move too slow. For me, anyway.
No, I already decided that I wasn't going to worry. At least for me, I wasn't going to worry about how much material we cover at any particular time. It just there's no point in worrying about that. And the essence of focus is slowness. That's going to come up later. That's Ayn Rand, by the way.
Unpublished.
I got him
unpublished Ayn Rand. That's unpublished Ayn Rand.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, right. So we're thanking our audience for coming, and we hope to have you join us.
Daniel, you've got the room open? Now we got the thing's been posted?
Yes. Once we end the live stream, we'll start letting people in.
You'll start letting them in after we're finished.
Have we stopped?
Okay. All right.
Not yet.
We're still recording. Okay.
So let's
conclude.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So we'll see you next week, and maybe we'll see some of the audience momentarily. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Lee.